An ongoing study as well, all right? This study is not finished up yet. We sent out an initial report that many of you got last summer where we looked at 2011 and 2012 data. We then got some helpful feedback from folks like Tom Yoder from WACF. He gave us some good feedback on revising some of our calculations, adding in golf courses, looking at channel front properties for irrigation as well. And we've also had a lot of people say, well, what about 2013? And so we're adding in 2013 as well. So we're going to be coming out with a more finalized study here later this summer, which would be the 3 years. And that's what I'm going to talk about some of the data about here this morning. Here's the water cycle. You can see this is sort of complicated, but the major sorts of things I want to show is precipitation. That's how our water gets from the atmosphere down to the land. We've got evaporation going on from surface water back up to the atmosphere. Evapotranspiration, this is what the plants are doing outside. As they do photosynthesis, they're giving off oxygen, but they're also giving off water. Okay? And so that's a way that water goes from the ground back up. We've got runoff, which can happen through streams or just over the land. We've got groundwater as well. And that groundwater infiltrates down and through the soil and then gets in the groundwater and it can move around in the groundwater. Diagram, I think, I've seen this in many places, a losing lake versus a gaining lake. So at certain times, we can think of this as Lake Wawasee. You've got the lake right here, and you've got the land around the lake, right? And the groundwater, so the water table is down here. As the water table is above the lake surface, groundwater is going to be pumping into the lake. So those springs are flowing like crazy, and there's water coming into the lake. Other times, when the water table drops, those springs actually reverse direction, and rather than pumping into the lake, they're actually drains to the lake, allowing the water to leave. Okay, so this is a losing lake. So you can see then with the water table, as it adjusts, it's going to make for more water coming to the lake, more water leaving the lake. And that happens during different sort of drought or wet periods during the year. A well which is successful, where it's pulling water, or you can have a well which is unsuccessful, which is just pulling just sort of open space there with air in it. So 200 to 300 feet under where we're sitting or standing right now is bedrock, okay? And that bedrock slowly or gradually slants towards Lake Michigan. Okay, so water that infiltrates down is going to go down near that bedrock, and it's going to slowly flow towards Lake Michigan. Gravel and sand, and if you've ever sort of played with your kids or grandkids or yourself with sand castles and you pour water on it, the water quickly just disappears down in the sand, right? There's all little spaces around that sand or gravel where water can accumulate, and that's an aquifer. It's not just a big open tank in the ground, it's actually water filling in the cracks. And so in this area, we've got a lot of sand and gravel deep under, and so we've got a big aquifer. There's a lot of water there, and that's slowly moving up towards Lake Michigan. So this sort of shows that, okay? So if you think of the bedrock as being sort of the white along the bottom here, and then you've got the main water table above that, this sort of blue-gray color, okay? And you can see that that can kind of slant towards a stream. Maybe this is Turkey Creek, or this could be a lake here in Lake Wawasee's instance. But it's a lot more complicated than that, because in this area we had a lot of glacial activity which really mixed things up. And so we've got clay layers, and that's how we get perched water tables. That's what's being showed here. So if you have a clay, if you've ever worked with clay before, you know water doesn't seep through clay very easily, right? And so if you have a layer of clay, water is going to percolate down and sit on top of that clay. Okay, it's not going to go all the way down to this main water table. So we've got all these what are called aquicludes. They sort of stop the water, all mixed around the watershed of Lake Wawasee. And so there's all this complicated stuff going on with water sitting in certain areas and sinking down deeper in other areas. And this is always in flux, moving up and down, and the water's also flowing at the same time. So it's a very complicated geology and hydrology that we have in this area. Lake Wawasee and Syracuse Lakes have bounced around in their lake levels, okay? And I'm really sort of sad to see that this data set, I love data because I'm a scientist, and this data set ends in 2002. We don't have data since then. But we had data starting back in the early 1940s. For instance, it always bounced back the very next year. So when I first had this data, and in 2012 we were all concerned, is the lake ever going to come back? I could say and predict it most likely will come back if history is a guide, because it's always bounced back the very next year. Watershed of Lake Wawasee and Syracuse Lakes in brown here. Now there's also a groundwater shed. So this is the surface watershed, which we normally think of, kind of the topography of the land and how the water moves. Well, underneath it though, there's also this bedrock, which has a whole different topography from the glaciers that scoured it out, kind of like a bulldozer, right? So the water's moving in different ways. And most of the boundaries are pretty similar for the groundwater shed versus the surface water. We look at the dam outlet. We worked with Chad Johnson there, and he manipulated the dam in different ways, opened gates, closed certain things, so that we could measure the actual flow coming out, so we know under different conditions how much flow is leaving the lakes. We can look at groundwater, as I just talked about a little bit. We can also look at irrigation. These major water withdrawal facilities, they need to report how much water they withdraw, but those numbers don't become available until August of the next year. So to get the 2013 data, we won't have that till August of this year, 2014. So we're not quite done with this work yet. The drought year had lots of confounding factors. So in 2012, there was no ice cover in 2011, leading into 2012. So there was extra evaporation, because normally the ice would seal off the lake, right? No evaporation during the winter. But that whole winter, there was evaporation happening, getting rid of some of the water. Higher summer evaporation, because when the temperature goes up, evaporation goes up. Higher irrigation, we already talked about that. Lower precipitation, and lower stream inflow. So all these things combined to give us that 18-inch drop in Lake Wawasee during 2012. The majority of the inflows and outflows are beyond human control, right? We can't do anything about precip, streams in, groundwater, evaporation, other than maybe we could put a huge pool cover over Lake Wawasee in the summer, right? We can't control any of those things. What we can control is the stream outflow and irrigation. Those are the only two things. But the vast majority of what's going on in Lake Wawasee water levels is over here in these four components. So we can only sort of tinker with it just a little bit and how appear to be temporary. Majority of influence are beyond our control. What are some of these implications? Well, the only two we can do anything about is irrigation and dam operations, okay? So we could hold back more of the water during the winter time with how we operate the dam. We could water lawns less. We'll look at agriculture as well for that irrigation and golf courses. So those are really the only